Hello, and welcome back to Lord of Heroes Beginner's Guides here on Nyris Gaming. Today we are going to be covering the Link Summon tier list, because when you first unlock summoning, you are given a list of heroes that you may not know anything about, and it's pretty dang early, and there are a lot of options, 24 as of the last update, and you are offered one of them immediately, so it's even a larger decision than the contract heroes, because those you can get all of them eventually. These ones you will have to spend link stones on all but one of them. So let us begin. We are going to be going in the order that they show up from right to left, so the first one is going to be Earth Aslan. We are using the same methodology for all of these based on whether they give extra value beyond their main role or how well they perform their main role. Earth Aslan is going to go right up to A. He is an action gauge booster, and he is very similar to Watercrom in that he is a very good 2-turn action gauge booster, and his 1 and 3 are basically useless, as you can see here. His 1 does have the benefit of reducing a single target's attack, but that's about it. The burst ignoring defense does not help at all, and you would need to get him maxed out for that to be doing any worthwhile damage, and even then, there are better options for that. But as an action gauge booster, he is pretty solid, and he gives attack up to your team, which is not the most readily available for Earth teams. He is one of the best for that. Moving on to Fire Baretta, she is going to land right about the same place. She is a purely single target fire DPS as a striker. She does pretty solid damage. She gets a decent number of extra turns with a couple of her abilities, but it's kind of hard to justify spending your free hero from the Link Summon banner on Fire Baretta when a free-to-play hero exists in the form of Fire Lucilica, and she has enemy max HP scaling. So Fire Baretta is not bad, but there are other options that are more easily accessible that you could go for. Next up is Water Alev, who just got buffed this patch as well. She's gonna go up here. She is a water warrior. She has AoE on her 2 and 3. She has enemy max HP scaling on everything, and that is basically the entirety of her kit. She does it better than she used to after the patch. The main thing she struggles with is absurdly low attack for a DPS, but she still does a decent amount of damage, as seen here. Just not the kind of damage you would expect from a full DPS. The main way to get her into the higher tier of damage dealing is her Berserk Relic, although relegating her to being excellent to her Divine Relic is kinda silly, and you'll have better options, the likes of which are Water Dragon Knight Helga or even Water Fram. She does about the same amount of damage as Water Fram. Moving on, we have our Fire Battle Cleric Johan. You might be seeing a trend developing here. There are a lot of very good options on here, very few poor options. It's a lot more consistent than the free-to-play heroes, mainly because these all used to be paid-only characters. Fire Johan, though, offers a lot of offensive and defensive buffs to the team. He himself does not do a ton of damage, but it's a little bit. He's also highly based on attack and critting. I just wish he did a little bit more. Solid option if you don't have Fire Aaron yet for crit damage up to the team. He is just not terribly necessary most of the time, but he's not a bad option. Moving on to Fire Laphlaes. He's a very weird sniper, but he's gonna go up here as well. Now, looking at him and seeing how his attack was absurdly low, I was expecting him to do basically nothing with his burst. However, as you can see there, he provided quite a little chunk there, more than Fire Johan, who is purely attack-based. He can remove buffs from enemies. His burst has a lot of debuffs it can apply. The only problem is that that one will only do that kind of damage against Earth targets. He is mainly there to provide burst gauge and buffs and debuffs, but he does pretty decently at that. Moving on to Earth Lumie. She is going to be our first B tier. She is an Earth Guardian, and just to be sure, I tested. She does not do very much damage. Her main goal is to boost your highest attack ally, because she does that with 2 separate abilities. She has a very solid AoE defense down, which is very good. The only problem is that's about where it ends. You can use her for the boosting and the defense down, but that's about it. She's durable, but I would almost go with Earth Alev or any other universal action gauge booster. The likes of Light Cessair or Fire Charlotte later on this list are better options generally, or if you happen to get Dark Lelouch at that time. She can be used, just there's oftentimes better options. Next up is Dark Rosanna. She is going here with Earth Lumie. She's a Dark Guardian. She does not do very much damage either, albeit more than Earth Lumie. She gets current HP damage on her 1, which is not very frequent in this game, just because max HP damage is much better. She is primarily an action gauge booster, but she is a 3-turn action gauge booster, which is a step below most all of the other ones. This can be mitigated with one of her relics, but that is not as easy to acquire. She does have a pretty decent AoE provocation on her burst, but once again, with all of this, there are just better options in most places, but not entirely unusable. The next one, however, Fire Rosanna, is going to be our first and only C tier, in my opinion. Fire Rosanna is a Fire Striker, has AoE attacks, and yet does barely any damage. And she is able to shield the team with her 2. And that's about it. There is another character on this list that is going to outperform her in every way, and that character isn't even a striker. She just doesn't really have any place to be in the game really right now. Everything she does can be done immensely better by so many other characters. Fire AoE damage, you have Fire Roselic. Fire single target damage, you have either Baretta or Lucilica. Fire shielding of the team, you have Fire Olivia later on, and she provides action gauge boosting as well. There's just no reason to pick Fire Rosanna at this current time. I did say previously that Fire Rosanna was going to be the only C tier of this list. However, I forgot I did not write down what I have for Water Solphi. And re-looking at everything she has, I'm going to put her down here too. She is another striker, but she does even less damage than Fire Rosanna. She has stuns on everything, and she has a Blitz relic, but stuns become less and less effective the later into the game you get, especially with most of the raid content. They are completely immune, as keeps coming up. She has pretty low attack for a striker, her stun chances are low on top of them not being very useful, and in order for her to output the damage she needs her relic. So once again, she does not really have a place. Next up is going to be Light Cleric Vanessa. She is going to go up here. She used to be immensely worse, but she is better these days after they patched her a while ago. I did not take raid damage from her because she only has a single damaging ability, and it's not meant to do a bunch of damage. It does heal the entire team based on the damage it does though, but she has a bit of an incongruent scaling issue in that regard. Her 2 has a 3-turn cooldown and gives the entire team attack up and invincibility, so you have that semi-on-demand, especially if you string in her burst, which gives her an extra turn, gives regen to the team, and heals them. She can output a lot of healing in a short period of time, and she pairs nicely with Light Helga that just released, given she action gauge boosts allies based on them being in invincibility. She also has access to buff removal in the form of a relic, if you're able to get that. Next up, another light hero is Light Zaira. She used to be the main light DPS when she came out. Nowadays there are immensely better options, but she does decently. Her burst will net you a good bit of extra damage, given it has enemy max HP scaling. Her Her main problem is her attack is atrocious, so she has very minimal to work with. On top of that, all of her other things are purely defensive focused. Her other abilities, her stats, her relics. So she's meant to do damage, but she can't. At least not as effectively as other light DPSs. Her 2 does provide defense up for the team, so she can block a bit of damage for the whole team, and provides a couple of debuffs on her 1. Once again, not a terrible pick, but not the best of the best, but she can do what she needs to do. Next up is Waterlin, and this is going to be our first S tier, because cooldown reduction is very element focused these days. And she was the first one to ever be able to do it, and she does not need to have a specific element of ally to do it, and she can do it pretty much every other turn, reducing your entire team's cooldowns by 1 turn. She used to be a very staple character in a lot of raid builds, allowing your action gauge boosters to action gauge boost every turn. This can still be done, but there's also a much heavier focus on elemental focus teams. The main thing that's weird about her is she has defense scaling on everything she has, and yet she does this kind of damage. Which is heavily disappointing, and I don't know why that doesn't scale anywhere near as hard, or why it's even there in the first place. That's pitiful. She can very effectively drop the defense of a single target, and she can up the cooldown of a single target as well with her burst. Get her one of her relics, and she can also up the attack strength of your team if they are water. All around, she has a lot to offer and is very effective on a lot of teams. Next is Dark Mei Ling, and she goes right up here as well. She is effectively the dark element version of Light Sifrid. She is a dark Shielder Cleric. She also has the added benefit of being able to debuff Purge, and can give you Focus Defense Light, which is a buff that reduces damage from light elemental enemies. We're only just now starting to see other elements of that. It is very minimal at the moment. Purely a health scaling cleric, she also does a decent bit of damage, shockingly. Most of her damage dealing scales with her max health, as well as the healing she does and the shielding, and her shield is on a 2-turn cooldown. Again, pairing with someone like Waterlin, she could be shielding every turn, or she has a cooldown reduction relic. Overall, a very solid choice. Speaking of solid choices, Fire Olivia. Immediate S tier. She can do pretty much everything. Her 2 provides decay defense on earth targets, is AoE, and that decay defense will boost her 1 and 3's damage. Her 1 will action gauge reduce and speed down a single target. Her 2 also shields based on her attack and gives action gauge boosting on a 2-turn cooldown. Her 3 does decent damage. And it applies up to 3 stacks of sap as well. So she can action gauge boost, she can do decent damage, she can sap high health targets, she can provide burst gauge given she is a sniper. All around, everything she does is wonderful. Only thing to keep in mind is that decay defense is specifically earth targets, but she is fine to add to other teams as well for the action gauge boosting and shielding and sapping. One of the best options on the Link Summon banner. Next up is Light Dhurahan, and this one's a bit depressing, because he would probably be an S if Light Helga didn't exist, because she pretty much has access to everything he does, but can do a bit more of other things as well and do a decent bit of damage. Dhurahan here can do kind of a good bit of damage. But you'd have to build him without all that speed he needs to action gauge boost, because he is an action gauge boosting guardian. He provides crit damage to the team, which Light Helga can do with her relic. His 1 is kinda eh, his 3 stuns, no AoE. Action gauge boosters are almost entirely focused on their action gauge boosting. Their other abilities seem to get pushed to the side most of the time, but a 2-turn action gauge boost and crit damage consistently is always welcome, so he's going to go in A along with Earth Aslan in that same category. Fire Olivia is really the one exception to most of that. He can do more damage with his enemy max HP relic, but again, if you get that. Dark Lumie, straight up here. She used to be alright, but a bit difficult to work with, given she was purely focused on buffs on her and debuffs on the enemy. Now she has enemy max health scaling on her 2, and it auto blitzes, so it fires twice when you use it. And her burst got a bit easier to use as well. And you can just see the damage numbers here, albeit mine are maxed out with Ascension and level 70. She hits frickin' hard. And she has sap on her too, and given that blitzes, she can rival Waterless Silica with the sap she provides, and hers are 2 turns instead of 1. She shields herself with her 1, her burst does a lot, especially if you add in the mix exposed weakness with someone like Dark Sifreed. She is excellent at the Alliance Raid and at Silence Traits. Her attack stat at level 70 in Ascension 2 is absurdly high, exceeding 2,000. Which is higher than even Dark Astrid. Her main drawbacks are her defensive stats are very low and she is very fragile. So overall, amazing. Most definitely the best DPS pick you can take here. Next up is Fire Charlotte. She is a Fire Cleric and a single target 100% action gauge booster on a 2-turn cooldown. Great on fire teams for your DPS. She also heals 2 allies with her 1. Once again, she only has that as a damage ability, so I didn't bother with the damage. The action gauge boost from her 2 also provides attack up to that target, and her burst heals, shields, removes debuffs, and removes buffs from enemies. Her burst is way overloaded with good things. Solid HP stat for all of her healing and shielding scaling as well. Her defense is a little bit on the low side, but with all the shielding and health, it will not matter all that much. Next up is Water Bianca, a water sniper and a very good supporting water sniper for water teams. She just got buffed recently. She can provide decay defense from her 2, primarily to fire enemies. She did kind of disappointing damage. I was not expecting it to be this low. Her 1 action gauge boosts the team, her burst is low cost and action gauge boosts the team as well, and it provides elemental weakness for those kind of builds, so you can overload them with debuffs and do more damage. She can get counterattack from her relic to action gauge every time she is hit. Her 2 also steals buffs from enemies, so that gives water teams access to buff removal, which becomes very, very necessary in later stages of the obelisk. Overall, a solid supporting sniper, good for burst gauge and action gauge boosting and debuffs. Her 2 also provides crit damage to the entire team, so overall a very solid supporting sniper. Next up is Dark Lairei, a Dark Guardian. She is going to go right up here as well. She has personal HP scaling on all of her damage, and here's how that turns out. Pretty solid there, so you can build her tanky and still hit hard. Her 1 auto flurries and has the chance to provide a lot of debuffs to the enemy, making exposed weakness builds decently easy, provided you have that from someone else. She does not have it personally. Her 2 can remove debuffs, which is very helpful. Her burst has a very high chance at 85% for an AoE provocation. Grants her revenge, so she can apply those debuffs again. Overall, not a lot to be disappointed by. She does what she does pretty effectively. Mix her in with the likes of Dark Lumie and Dark Sifreed, and you'll have a very solid exposed weakness DPS team. Next up is Light Walther. He just got buffed as well, and he is up here as well. A lot of the warriors got a lot of changes that gave them bonuses when they counterattack. So now he builds up warmth stacks when he counterattacks, which massively boosts the damage of his burst when he gets 4, and subsequently removes them. His burst doesn't do a ton of damage otherwise, but here's the little comparison. He can start hitting pretty dang hard. so his damage has definitely gone up from how it was before, but his main draw is that his 2 is an AoE that has a 100% chance to apply shock, and it's not elementally focused, so you can use him anywhere. On top of the fact that he does more damage now, he is a very solid choice and used quite frequently. Next up is Water Joshua. He goes right up here. He is a 3-turn action gauge booster, but the reason he is not down with Dark Rosanna is that his 2 purges debuffs and has a lot of burst gauge gain, especially since he is a sniper. You run him in burst formation, you press 2, and instantly your burst gauge is full. His 1 can also remove buffs from enemies, so you can deal with things like counterattack or stacking attack. His main drawback is his burst, which doesn't do much other than at higher ranks fully action gauge boost him. It's mostly a low cost option to string in other things, and it does decent damage if you build him for that. But again, considering all the rest of his kit, why would you? He is not meant to do damage. He is there to speed the team up, keep debuffs off of them, and provide burst gauge, and he does that excellently. Next up is Earth Fram, an Earth Sniper, and a very good one at that. Her kit makes it seem like she should be doing damage, but not a ton, so just build her for her utility. She is a sniper, so she's there for burst gauge. She is an Earth-specific cooldown reducer. Her 1 has a 100% chance of reducing a single target's defense, and it ups the crit rate of your highest attack ally. Her 2, on top of the cooldown reduction for your Earth team, gives her an extra turn so she can go into her other abilities. Her burst being 1 that's an AoE attack and gives the entire team defense up and immunity, so you do not have to worry about debuffs. And her stats are pretty decent across the board. She is great for supporting Earth allies that need their cooldown reduced to get their stacks of things up faster. There are a good few of those, like Earth Oswald and the new Earth Aaron. Aaron gets stacking attack on her too, so the more she can use that, the better she is going to be in a long drawn-out encounter. Penultimately, we have Earth 9. He is an Earth Striker and an AoE DPS, and he is not quite as bad as I thought he was without his relics. He does a solid amount, just not quite up to par with good DPSs. Once you get his relics, he starts spiking massively. I would put the enemy max HP damage chance below the Berserk one. The only problem with the Berserk one is if the battle goes too long, then it falls off and he has nothing. His Berserk relic is going to be better because it is the strongest Berserk in the game. At the maximum it can give is 90% per stack, and it ramps up to 3, which is massive. He does solid damage with or without the relics. His 2 also gives him up to 2 stacks of 100% crit damage, so he does even more. A very solid Earth DPS choice. And lastly, our newest addition in Light Alev with the previous update, going up here. The Link Summon banner is very heavy loaded with much better characters. They kind of had to, given they were expecting direct money for them. Light Alev doesn't really do much damage. However, her 1 guarantees a blitz eventually at higher levels, and her 2 is an AoE attack that removes all buffs from enemies and action gauge boosts the team. Her burst now applies an AoE decay defense on dark targets. That's the first time Light has had access to that. It also action gauge boosts the team, so she can get people going faster, provide an offensive debuff to dark targets, and provide burst gauge given she is a sniper. On top of that, she can get a relic that can extend debuff durations. And there you have it. That is my personal Link Summon banner tier list. Hopefully this helps you make a decision when you get to that point in the game as to who you want to choose. Main takeaway is don't choose Fire Rosanna or Water Solphi. Hopefully they'll get buffed in future, but as they stand right now, not really worth picking up. At least as far as gameplay is concerned, if you personally want a specific character purely for that character's sake, go for it. Getting the characters you're interested in should trump anything. That's going to do it for this tier list here on Nyris Gaming today. Subscribe for more in the future. We will get to a featured summon tier list eventually. That one for sure is going to be multiple parts because there is way too much on there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's anything you would change, like if you liked, and I shall see you in the next one.